Hi all, and welcome to a new component of my YouTube channel, which is going to be called the Wadster Deep Dives. This is going to be when I delve into the data and into the sides of my betting that I haven't really explored properly yet, from a strategy perspective. There'll be variables that I've covered before, and a lot of it might not even relate to tennis itself. It might relate to things like how I bet on certain days, certain rounds, which is very relevant to my first deep dive today, which is how do I fare when I bet at different types of betting volume on different days. So this is going to be really shoddy video work, so I do apologize for that, but I'm hoping we can kind of get the gist of this. So essentially what I wanted to do to explore was to see whether I perform better when I tip less volume in a day, or if I tip higher volume in a day. So at first I needed to kind of figure out how to separate this variable out. I thought at first maybe to do it based on the amount of points staked on the day, or but then I felt that probably wouldn't work, because in previous years I might have used a slightly different, less aggressive staking plan. So I thought probably a smarter way of doing it anyway would be to focus on how many matches would I specifically tip on during a day. And I separated it into smaller volume, medium volume, and higher volume. So I classify smaller volume when I've only tipped on 1 to 3 matches. I classify medium volume in a day when I've tipped on between 4 and 5 matches. And for larger volume is when I've tipped on 6 matches plus in a day. And I wanted to see how that affected my results, because I was saying at the start of the year, or I've said on certain days like that Australian Open first day, that I didn't feel like the quality of betting was there at the first round of the Australian Open. And then there was a day, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, where it was another high volume day, and it was a poor day. And I wanted to see whether this was a long-term trend for me, whether I continue to, I've done this over years, whether I would have high volume and not perform, and then throw away profit that I'd gained on smaller volume days, or whether it was just variance. And over a longer term, I had plenty of big days to kind of cancel out the smaller days. And it's actually super insightful what I've found out, I think. So yeah, I'll kind of get to it and explain what I've gathered, and how I'm interpreting all the data that I've been using and figured out. The first thing I need to say as well is in terms of how I've kind of cleaned the data a bit. So I decided to not include outrights. I think overall the outrights are in a bit of profit for the period from 2020 to 2023, because I think we landed a big outright each way in 2021. I think I only had one bet that year on an outright, and it was something like an each way winner at 33 to 1. The other years have been kind of smaller losses. But I decided to remove that for two main reasons. Firstly, because I often do the outright betting separately when I've got a bit more time, so I don't tend to base volume or stuff on outright, so it's not really relevant to this whole kind of data that I'm analyzing. And secondly, because they're just higher odds there anyway, so it just creates more variance within the data set itself. And I think in a sense it probably is less useful than more useful to use that. So I removed that. And one thing that was immediately encouraging was to remove the outrights from my own data this year. I don't think I've included yesterday's results in this, but but generally speaking, outside the outright bets this year, we've actually made sort of 16 points profit on. These are all the bets to do with matches, so it will include the Bet365 ones, it will include the set scores, obviously all the high limit markets, for an ROI of 7%. And then I did the filters, so I would obviously check the date that the matches would be on, and then I'd just record the results for each day and tally it up into the different numbers of matches for the day. And not surprisingly, the data this year showed what I was kind of saying earlier in the year, that outside of the really high volume days, I felt like I've been so in control of my betting, and the results have been really strong. And that is backed up already by the fact we've made 44 points profit on days where we've bet on 5 matches or less, for an ROI of around 25%, which is like incredible, really. And then I've obviously had those days at that day at the Australian Open, and then a couple of high volume days that I lost, and they've totaled minus 25 points for an ROI of minus 32%, which is obviously very strongly supporting the fact that my betting this year has been very good, aside from that sort of those 3 days, which I think is actually really encouraging, because I feel like those days were days where I just made mistakes because I bet too much. I'm going to go into that topic a bit more after just giving a bit more of a general overview, but I think it is that those results make sense in terms of how I see the quality of my betting this year as well. But the next thing to do really is to look at it from a wider perspective. And the thing that is immediately obvious to note is the fact that outside of this year, last year I actually was better when I was tipping higher volume. So the days where I had 6+ matches, we made 37.89 points profit. In 2020, we made an ROI of 34% and 17 points profit. But obviously I was doing, it was quite a sort of tedious sort of Excel work of going through each thing step by step. There's no shortcuts kind of thing. But when you do it like that, you also notice trends that you pick up. And one thing I was really noticing when looking at the high volume days was there was massive variance in terms of the results on those given days. It tended to be like I would have big blowout days or massive days. But I also noticed a trend between the days that were really good and the trend between days that were really bad. And I think the main thing I noticed were when they were days that were really good, it was because it was a specific like event or specific plan that I targeted for that day, and I knew the players really well. I just had, and I'd gotten a real flow state. So an example of that would be at Madrid. Like Madrid is one of my favorite events. Like it's got altitude, clay, the conditions are perfect for betting. And then I would maybe bet maybe 6 matches or like maybe 8 matches in a day at Madrid, where I'll be betting on underdogs like Pool vs Rublev or something like that. And I was hitting so many winners, and I'd maybe make 15 points profit on a day like that where I'm tipping really high volume, but in a controlled way, where like I was still really utilizing my strengths as a tipster, which is kind of getting a read on event and then utilizing my knowledge on those top players and making a lot of profit. But then the reverse, the times where I was doing really badly on high volume days, I would say were the days where, looking back, were the days where I've been kind of maybe not slept well the night before. And the funny thing about a lack of sleep and an intuitive better is like sometimes you don't really understand how much that's impacted you. Like sometimes you still see all these ideas. But the problem with that is that when you're tired, you don't filter these bad ideas out. So and it's sort of a double whammy when you're tired and you've got lots of matches to get through and you're analysing them all, and then you're seeing all these ideas and you don't have, firstly, you don't have much time to rule them out, and secondly, you're not mentally sharp enough to rule them out. And what I was doing is I'd be sending, like, I'd say that there are a number of days like this where I'd send out a lot of bets on days where I hadn't slept too well and I hadn't sort of really considered the downsides of the bets, and I would make some really poor decisions, and a lot of the time I'd be betting really solidly for a period where I'd betting on 1 to 3 matches or whatever, and then I'd throw it away with a really just random bad day with high volume. And yeah, so it really felt like a case where I know I can bet on high volume, as the results show. I've got an ROI still of 5.5% on days where I've kind of bet with more than 6 matches in a given match. But it's also the time where I've been far more likely to throw in bad days, and obviously when you're betting at high volume and you make sort of 4 or 5 mistakes in a given day, then that's really going to cut your ROI. So without sort of like, because you don't want to delve too much into individual years data because it becomes more noise after a while when you look into it too much on that micro level. But the next step for me to do was to filter it out. So the days where I had really high volume, where it was sort of 20 points plus staked, where I'm obviously probably betting on 9-10 matches at least in a day, because my theory, sort of like going in line with what I was just stating there, was the fact that when I'm betting too much in one go, it's because my filtering process for bad bets isn't there, and I'm making mistakes because I'm not filtering out sort of rough bets, and that there might be a sort of sweet spot where I'm sort of still betting high volume, but I'm betting sort of between 10 to 20 points perhaps. That's probably a more kind of realistic figure of like a day where it's in control and I'm betting high volume, but it's still smart and it's still I'm playing to my strengths. And that's obviously small sample, but that's exactly the conclusion that we can see with the data. So for days where I've staked more than 20 points on the board, I've staked 180 points for minus 29 points overall for an ROI of minus 16%, which is really poor. But then when you've got the days with 6 matches plus and under 20 points staked, I've staked 525 points for profit and loss of 67 points and ROI of close to 13%, which shows that when I'm in a place where I'm betting high volume, it doesn't necessarily mean like it's time to panic. If I'm playing to my strengths, if it's a week like Madrid, I don't want to. The reason I've done this whole data analytics, the purpose of it is to kind of show objectively where my strengths and where my weaknesses lie. And the problem I have, where if I was before, I was saying maybe I need to stay away from high volume completely, and tell you guys that that's the case and that I'm not going to bet on high volume. It suddenly will cause panic in you guys as subscribers if you then see me betting 10 to 15 10 matches in a day, and it's like, oh, no, this isn't a good day to be betting this kind of thing. And from my own perspective as well, it's kind of what I wanted to gain clarity on was there a sweet spot, because I felt that it probably was, and that's exactly what we've found here, where I can bet obviously for certain tournaments, be confident in sticking with my instincts and betting a decent amount. But when it's the case that I'm tired, or if it's the case that it's an early round, I really shouldn't be betting that kind of volume. and everything that this shows is super encouraging from a perspective of moving forward and knowing how to make decisions on my tips. Because if you look at the data for matches where I've staked between 1 to 3 points and not 1 to 3 points, 1 to 3 matches or 4 to 5 matches, it's very kind of rock solid. 10% ROI on the ones where 4 to 5 matches where I've got plenty of time to analyze, 8% for 1 to 3 matches. Obviously dropping to the 5% for over. But now I know that where I'm probably going to have to be really cautious is if I've not slept well at all, maybe just have literally create a limit for myself where like I'll only bet on a maximum of 3 matches, because let's pretend like I have a day where I've got loads of ideas, and the thing is, like a lot of these days where I didn't sleep well, I'd still be really confident on these high volume days. But then I'd figure out a couple of days ago, I'd look back and be like, what was I doing? Like, why have I done that? And I think now just knowing this and having clarity on this is going to prevent that from happening in future, because I will know like not to trust myself in a sense. If I know I'm not feeling mentally sharp, then you just can't bet too much. Like it would be crazy based on what we've just seen. So this allows me to kind of feel really confident in my own betting, because it shows that when the conditions are right for betting, I really do excel. The results there just illustrate that. I do think I need to note that I didn't want to remove the period from after the US Open from the data last year, because it's a bit stupid if you just kind of remove the data from the periods where you don't perform well. But from a contextual perspective, I know I wasn't in a mentally sharp place between September and November after the US Open last year. It was just a rough patch in personal life, and I should have bet a lot less. But I've kind of figured out like why that period happened, and like this year has been far more consistent in terms of being in the right headspace for betting, because that's the most important thing overall. But if you just, I do feel that if you exclude those kind of that period where I just didn't perform at the end of last year, and then sort of take the context of this data as well and what we've found with this data, I think there's so much within this first analytical thing that I've done to be very encouraged about moving forward. So yeah, like I know I've waffled so much in this video, but I just really wanted to give all these kind of different insights into what I was thinking with how I'm interpreting this data. The whole point of this channel, this new kind of YouTube section, by the way, I'll cover in a different video, but yeah, that's one to get started. The next video I'm going to do on kind of the analytical side of things is going to be on variance, because it's such a controversial topic, and I think it's one of those where I can understand how subscribers get annoyed about me complaining about variance and that kind of thing. So I want to find a way. I'm going to sort of find a process and a way of really kind of making it a bit more objective in terms of how many close matches have won, how many close matches have lost, tie-break records in each year, and that's going to be the next video I do on the data side of things. I've got loads of ideas actually in terms of different variables to investigate and so forth. So I hope you all enjoy the content, because I think that there's plenty more to come.